Welcome to Book Summary Podcast, your gateway to personal transformation. Each episode delivers big ideas from the world's most impactful books on mindset, productivity, and success, all in just a few minutes. Ready to turn knowledge into action? Let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. In a world overflowing with information, endless to-do lists, and just a constant barrage of notifications, it often feels like we should be more productive than ever.
All right, you'd think so.
We have tools for everything, yet for so many of us, it's kind of the opposite. More stress, more work, and that nagging feeling that we're, simply treading water, barely keeping up. Today, we're not going to talk about new apps or productivity hacks. Instead, we're embarking on a fascinating deep dive into some profound insights that truly challenge what we think we know about getting things done.
Yeah, and these insights are drawn from this really sweeping investigation looking into neurologists, business leaders, psychologists, even like you mentioned, the filmmakers behind a certain famously successful animated movie.
Right.
What's truly fascinating here and what really sparked this whole quest was a very personal question. The author of the work we're digging into, Charles Duhigg, a busy journalist himself, found himself wrestling with his own productivity. And like many of us, he was wondering how some people managed to achieve so much. So he turned to someone he really admired, Atul Gawande.
Oh, wow. The surgeon and writer.
Exactly. Gawande seemed like, well, a paragon of success. Almost impossibly productive, world-class surgeon, New Yorker writer, Harvard professor, WHO advisor, best-selling author, MacArthur Genius Grant recipient. The list goes on.
Seriously impressive.
Yeah. And Duhigg's question was actually disarmingly simple. How do you do it? What's your secret?
Just straight up asked him.
Just asked him. And that simple inquiry sparked this 4-year investigation. And what this deep dive will reveal, really, is that the secret isn't about working harder. It's about working smarter. It's about understanding these underlying, often invisible mechanisms of, motivation, teamwork, focus, decision-making, innovation, and learning.
And it's crucial to understand right from the start that productivity isn't like one size fits all.
Not at all.
What's productive for a theoretical physicist? Maybe spending weeks on a failed experiment, but seeing that as a step forward is totally different from an engineer trying to shave milliseconds off an assembly line, right?
Completely different. A productive morning for one person might be an intense workout. For another, it's being locked away, clearing emails.
Exactly. And we are living through this era of just unprecedented technological revolution. Smartphones, instant communication, global supply chains, all this stuff was supposed to simplify life, free us up.
That was the promise, yeah.
But for so many, it's paradoxically led to more work, more pressure, more stress. It sounds like the real problem isn't the tools themselves, but maybe our focus on the tools, the gadgets, the apps, the perfect filing systems, instead of understand the deeper lessons they offer about human behavior and how organizations actually work.
You've really hit on a critical point there, because some individuals and companies have figured it out. They figured out how to master this changing world. It's about spotting these pivotal choices that some people and organizations consistently make choices that maybe others completely overlook. This isn't about finding a new app that'll magically streamline your life.
Right. No magic bullets.
No magic bullets. It's not a simple list of tips and tricks. This deep dive is about a fundamental shift in how we approach our work, our relationships, even how we understand our own minds.
Yeah.
So our mission today is really to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the surprising facts from this extensive research, to give you, our listener, a kind of shortcut to being a truly well-informed on what genuinely separates the vastly productive from, everyone else.
We're looking for those underlying behaviors, the dynamics that drive success, whether it's just for one person or a whole company.
Exactly. The human element behind it all.
So if it's not about the latest gadget, what is it about? If we want to understand what makes people smarter, faster, better, where do we even begin, it sounds like?
Yeah.
Motivation, is that the starting point?
I think it has to be. To really understand the deep science of drive, let's start with a rather puzzling, almost poignant case. A man named Robert Philippe.
Okay.
Robert was a true self-made bayou mogul from Louisiana. Started with just a small gas station, and through, sheer grit, charisma, and an absolute love for his work, he built this empire. Auto parts, chemicals, paper, land, real estate.
Wow, quite the portfolio.
Oh, yeah, a force of nature, constantly driving dirt roads, cutting deals, always on the go. Apparently, even after he quit drinking years before, he'd still pour himself club soda at business dinners just so he could be present, making deals while others were, indulging. He was just defined by this boundless energy and ambition.
A real powerhouse. You can picture him. So what happened? What could possibly stop a man like that?
Well, his story took this perplexing, really sudden turn during a South American trip with his wife, Viola. Midway through in La Paz, which is, way up there, 12,000 feet altitude.
Yeah, altitude, yeah.
Robert started acting strangely, staggering, throwing coins at children, rambling incoherently, very out of character.
It's bizarre.
Totally. And when they got back home, Viola noticed this profound, really disturbing shift. Robert, the guy who never sat still, would now just stare blankly at the TV for hours, utterly indifferent.
Just zoned out.
Completely lost interest in his hobbies, fishing, hunting, exploring properties. He'd sit at his desk for hours just gazing into space, not engaged with work at all.
Did they think it was depression?
That was the obvious thought. But when his doctor, Dr. Strub, asked if he was unhappy or depressed, Robert just said, "No, I feel good." He just didn't seem to have any get up and go left. It was like his internal engine had simply stopped.
That's incredibly strange. Not sad, just empty. What was the medical explanation?
Well, after a lot of investigation, Dr. Strub finally found some slight brain damage, possibly these tiny hemorrhages triggered by the altitude, specifically in Robert's striatum.
The striatum? What part of the brain is that exactly?
It's deep inside. And this clue led to a breakthrough by a French researcher, Professor Bruno Habib. He studied similar cases and found that all his apathetic patients had these tiny, pinprick-sized burst vessels in the exact same area, the striatum.
Wow. So that specific area is key.
It seems to be. Neurologists now think the striatum acts like the brain's central dispatch, maybe like a do-it button. It takes the decisions your prefrontal cortex makes, like, I should really get up and do the laundry, and translates that into the actual desire to move. It regulates your moods, too. Without it firing correctly, that I should just never becomes an I want to.
So it connects thought to action, or at least the will to act.
Precisely. Habib described this 19-year-old woman who could perfectly well clean her room or wash dishes if you specifically asked her to. But if you left her alone, she wouldn't move all day. Didn't express preferences for dinner, no curiosity. It clearly showed a loss of internal drive, not a physical problem. The desire, the will was just missing.
So it's not being physically unable. It's lacking that spark that want to do something. That's a really profound distinction. Did anyone dig into this idea of internal desire, of agency, more?
Yes, absolutely. This idea of the brain's internal do-it button was really illuminated by Mauricio Delgado's fMRI experiments. He was studying brain activity during a simple guessing game.
Okay, looking at brain scans.
Yeah. Initially, he was just interested in excitement and anticipation. But what he discovered later was really profound. When participants were allowed to make their own guesses during the game, their striata lit up. You could see the neurological equivalents of anticipation and excitement firing away.
But what about when they didn't choose?
That was the key. When the computer made the guesses for them, their striata were, well, essentially silent. Almost no activity related to motivation or reward.
Wow. So the brain literally got bored or just disengaged when it wasn't in the driver's seat, even if the odds of winning were identical. That's wild.
Isn't it? It strongly suggests the act of choosing is in itself a kind of reward. Participants consistently said they enjoyed the game much more when they had control. They called it a challenge, not a chore.
Even though the chances were exactly the same.
Exactly the same odds of winning or losing. The core insight here is that the belief that you are in control fundamentally transforms the experience. It makes people way more motivated and engaged. It's not just about the outcome, it's the perception of agency.
And this idea of perceived control, it ties directly into a broader psychological concept, doesn't it? The locus of control.
It absolutely does.
That sounds like it connects straight to our everyday lives, especially now with, the changing nature of work.
Hugely relevant. Traditional lifelong employment is fading for many, right? We see more freelancing, gig work, more transitory careers.
Yeah, definitely.
In this kind of environment, self-motivation becomes critical. Having what psychologists call an internal locus of control is vital.
Meaning you believe you can influence things yourself.
Exactly. People who believe they can directly influence their lives and outcomes, they tend to earn more, report higher happiness, more life satisfaction.
Mm.
It links to academic success, social maturity, lower stress, even longer lifespan.
That's a huge range of benefits.
Yeah.
And the opposite, external locus.
That's the belief that outside forces mostly control your life. And it's often correlated with higher stress and less overall satisfaction. But here's the really crucial part.
Okay.
It's not fixed. Locus of control isn't something you're just born with. It can be significantly influenced, even cultivated, through training and feedback.
You can learn it. How?
There was this fascinating puzzle experiment back in '98 with fifth graders. They gave them puzzles. Some kids were praised for hard work, something they control, their effort. That activated their internal locus. They tackled harder puzzles, put in more effort, and actually enjoyed it more.
Okay, so focusing on effort. What about the other kids?
The others were praised for intelligence, something perceived as innate, something you can't really influence.
Right, like you're so smart.
Exactly, and that actually led to less motivation. They preferred easier puzzles because they were afraid failure would expose a lack of this fixed intelligence they'd been praised for.
Wow. So how you praise, how you frame success makes a huge difference in fostering that sense of agency.
A massive difference. It's about nurturing that belief that your effort matters, that you're in control of your inputs.
And this makes me think about environments specifically designed to instill that inner drive, like the Marine Corps. They're famous for discipline and motivation. How do they cultivate that sense of personal control? It seems almost paradoxical in such a structured environment.
It does seem paradoxical, but the Marine Corps, maybe surprisingly, is a masterclass in manufacturing motivation and cultivating that internal locus. Take Quintanilla, a young guy who enlisted back in 2010.
Okay.
23, community college degree, but felt stuck. Part-time jobs, too much World of Warcraft, you know the type. He enlisted because he was ready for something better, something with purpose. And the commandant at the time, General Krulak, he actually noticed a shift in applicants. He said they were much weaker, sometimes didn't even have the vocabulary for ambition.
That's a strong statement. So they changed basic training.
Significantly, it wasn't just about discipline and obedience anymore. They shifted to incorporate what they called a mental makeover.
A mental makeover in boot camp. How do you even do that? It sounds like you'd want less control, not more, in that setting.
Well, one powerful example is from the Crucible, their brutal 54-hour final challenge. There's an obstacle called Sergeant Timmerman's tank.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it is. Recruits have to cross this muddy pit, full gear, gas masks on, with seemingly impossible rules like you must hear a direct verbal order from the team leader.
They can't hear through the gas masks, right?
Exactly. The drill instructors know this. The hidden lesson is, you can't just obey orders. You have to take control and figure things out for yourself. They have to choose to adapt, to find a way around the impossible rule.
Ah, so the constraint forces initiative.
Precisely. And another moment, climbing this grueling hill called the Grim Reaper. Exhausted, injured recruits. Without being told, they just started linking arms, choosing to help each other, providing mutual support so no one fell. A spontaneous, self-directed act of will.
So it wasn't just following orders. It was choosing to act, choosing to take initiative, even when pushed to the absolute limit. What about those why questions I've heard about?
You're right. That's a crucial piece. Drill instructors actively push recruits to ask why when things are utterly miserable.
Why am I putting myself through this?
Exactly. It transforms the immediate hardship into something deeply personal. Quintanilla would ask his pack buddy, why are you doing this? And the answer may be something like, to become a Marine and build a better life for my family, immediately connects that physical suffering to a larger chosen purpose. Like seeing his wife and newborn child again, knowing he's building something for them.
Connecting the daily grind to the big picture.
That focus on the why helps recruits tap into and strengthen their internal motivation and the outcomes. Despite often low material rewards in the Corps, career satisfaction is incredibly high. Since Krulak's reforms, retention and performance scores are up over 20%. And surveys show a significant, measurable increase in internal locus of control during training.
That's a really powerful transformation. It shows how deliberate choices about fostering motivation can yield huge results. Are there other examples, maybe less intense ones, where this choice and control idea plays out?
Absolutely. And in a remarkably poignant setting, nursing homes.
Nursing homes, how does that work?
Researchers observed this group they nicknamed the subversives. These were residents who, despite their age and often limited autonomy, found small ways to rebel to exercise agency.
Little rebellions, like what?
Like trading food items at meals, or pointedly refusing dessert, even cake they usually liked. One resident famously said he'd rather eat a second-class meal that I have chosen than a 5-star meal someone else picked for him.
It's about the choice itself.
It's entirely about the choice. And the researchers found something remarkable. These subversives lived significantly longer, reported higher happiness, and were more active and intellectually engaged than their more compliant peers.
Wow. Longer lives just from feeling in control of small things.
It seems so. It wasn't about the cake, obviously. It was the profound act of choosing. As one gerontologist put it, it's the difference between making decisions that prove to yourself that you're still in charge of your life versus falling into a mindset where you're just waiting to die.
That puts it starkly. So whether it's Robert Philippe losing his spark from brain damage, or Quintanilla finding purpose in boot camp, or a resident asserting independence over dessert, the common thread is the huge impact of feeling you have control, making meaningful choices.
That's the absolute core of it.
It really makes you think about how we frame our own daily tasks, even the boring ones.
It does. When we feel apathy or disengagement, it often stems from that emotional disconnect feeling our actions don't matter or we lack agency. Remember the neurologist Habib mentioned his apathetic patients felt emotionally detached, not sad, almost like their will was just severed. The key takeaway from all these examples, Philippe's neurology, the Marines' training, the nursing home rebellions, is that self-motivation flourishes when we actively connect those immediate, often mundane or unpleasant tasks to a larger constellation of meaningful projects, goals, and values that we choose to pursue.
So you have to consciously make that link.
You have to actively ask yourself why. Explicitly articulate that connection. That process proves to yourself that your choices are meaningful, that you're genuinely in control, even in small ways. It's about forging that link between the daily grind and your deeper purpose. That's where real lasting drive comes from.
That's a powerful tool for personal motivation. And self-motivation is obviously a huge force, but what about when we're not working alone? What happens when we're part of a team? Is the secret just putting a bunch of smart, motivated people together in a room? Or is it more complicated?
Teams. This is where it gets really interesting because team dynamics are often incredibly counterintuitive. They defy our usual assumptions.
How so?
Consider Julia Rozovsky, a sharp MBA student at Yale. She was part of 2 very different teams there. Her first, a study group, had highly intelligent, curious, outgoing people you'd think they'd be great together, right?
Sounds like a dream team on paper.
On paper, yes. But she described it as a daily dose of stress. Subtle fights for leadership, constant pressure to prove yourself. She said she always had to be careful not to make mistakes. Academically, they did okay, but it was emotionally draining.
Okay, so smart people don't automatically make a good team experience. What about her other team?
Totally different story. Her case competition team was incredibly diverse. An Army officer, a think tank researcher, a nonprofit director, a refugee program manager, all sorts of backgrounds.
Very different perspective.
Very different, but they clicked instantly. Collaborative, supportive, energized. They ended up winning a national competition.
So what was the difference?
Julia's experience highlights the critical, often invisible role of group norms. These are the unwritten rules that dictate how people actually behave and interact within the team.
The unspoken rules.
Exactly. Norms determine if a team feels safe or threatened, energized, or totally enervated. Her study group's norms fostered guarding yourself, self-protection. Her case competition team's norms fostered genuine enthusiasm and mutual support.
It's a fascinating distinction. It's less about individual skills and more about the team's internal culture. This reminds me of Amy Edmondson's hospital research. She looked at teamwork and errors and famously found something unexpected, didn't she?
She absolutely did. A classic case of research flipping expectations. Edmondson, a Harvard researcher, hypothesized that naturally, stronger teamwork would lead to fewer errors on hospital wards. Makes sense, right?
Seems logical, yeah.
But after meticulously collecting data, she found the exact opposite. Wards with demonstrably stronger team cohesion actually reported more errors.
More errors? That sounds bad.
It sounded alarming at first, but her breakthrough insight was that it wasn't that they were making more errors, it was that they were reporting more errors.
Because they felt comfortable admitting mistakes.
Precisely. These teams felt empowered to voice opinions, take risks, and crucially, admit mistakes without fear of judgment or retribution. This concept is what she termed psychological safety.
Psychological safety.
It's a shared belief among team members that the team is a safe space for interpersonal risk-taking. You won't be humiliated or punished for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or, importantly, mistakes.
That's a huge distinction. So a team with low reported errors might actually just be good at hiding mistakes, not making fewer of them.
That's the implication. Psychological safety allows for honesty, learning, and ultimately, in that hospital setting, better patient outcomes because problems get surfaced and addressed.
This seems like exactly the kind of thing a data-driven giant like Google would want to measure and understand. Did they look into this?
Oh, they absolutely did, with huge resources and what they called Project Aristotle.
Right.
Google, obsessed with data and optimizing everything, launched this massive initiative to figure out what made their most effective teams tick. They analyzed hundreds of teams, tons of metrics, hoping to find that magic formula.
What did they think it would be? Hiring stars, putting people together physically.
Those were their initial hypotheses. Star performers, decisive leaders, co-location being physically together. Standard corporate wisdom, really.
And what did the data actually show? Did any of those myths hold up?
Nope. That was the big surprise. Not one of the myths, as they put it, proved consistently true. Individual brilliance, being in the same office, even how long people had been on the team, none were reliable predictors of long-term success.
So what did predict success?
The most successful teams shared specific norms that allowed everyone to mesh well. It created this collective intelligence that was less about the individuals and more a property of the group itself.
Wow.
Project Aristotle eventually boiled it down to 5 key norms. Things like feeling the work is important, having clear goals, but the most important one, the foundation for everything else. Psychological safety.
Psychological safety again. So what did Google find were the key drivers of that safety? What actually made teams feel safe?
2 things really stood out in their data. First, equality in speaking.
Everyone gets a turn.
Pretty much. Everyone on the team had roughly equal airtime and equal opportunity to contribute, regardless of role or seniority. Some Google leaders apparently even made little check marks or mental notes to ensure participation was balanced, stepping in if 1 or 2 people dominated.
Actively managing the conversation flow. What was the second thing?
The second was social sensitivity.
Empathy. Reading the room.
Exactly. These teams were highly skilled at intuiting how members felt. Picking up on tone of voice, body language, facial expressions. They even used a standard psychological test, the reading the mind in the eyes test, and found the best teams had higher average scores on social sensitivity. They noticed when someone was upset or felt left out, and they'd make an effort to check in.
So it's really about active listening, making sure everyone feels heard, valued, and understood.
Yeah.
This sounds, well, quite different from some famously chaotic, creative environments. I'm thinking about early Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
It's often painted as this intense bonding experience, shared culture, egos taking a back seat. Was that really it? Or was some other kind of safety at play?
Yeah, the SNL mythology is strong. Intense bonding, communal culture, legendary pranks. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about their chemistry. But the reality, according to many early writers and cast members, it was often fraught. Tension, fierce infighting, cliques, sometimes vicious criticism.
Really? Like actual fighting?
Creative fighting, yeah. Alan Zweibel and Gilda Radner, incredibly close friends, would apparently stop speaking during script writing over critiques. Garrett Morris often felt like an outcast. And Lorne Michaels, the producer, actually deliberately chose people with wildly different tastes. Zweibel's Borscht Belt humor versus Michael O'Donoghue's dark, shocking satire.
So definitely not one big, happy, harmonious family.
Not by a long shot, yet undeniably incredibly successful and groundbreaking. So what was the secret, if not that conflict-free bonding?
Yeah, what held it together?
The secret was that despite the chaos, despite the open conflict, they all felt safe enough to keep pitching ideas, to take huge creative risks, and to be brutally honest. Michaels fostered this safety. He made sure everyone got a chance to pitch, even the quieter ones. He modeled that social sensitivity, pulling people aside to ask about personal stuff. Famously letting an incredibly obscene parody sketch get read 18 times at a table read, knowing it would never air.
Just to let the idea breathe.
Exactly. To show that wild ideas were welcome, that the process mattered. This allowed for what you might call controlled conflict. Disagreements were productive because underneath it all, there is this sense of care. They were careful with one another's feelings, even when shooting down ideas. Like O'Donoghue, after a sketch was dropped, joking about creating the little train that died, instantly diffusing tension.
That's fascinating. So, true psychological safety isn't about no conflict. It's about being able to navigate conflict productively because there's trust.
You mailed it. And the leader is absolutely crucial in setting that tone, modeling that behavior, listening, encouraging equal voice, showing sensitivity. It's about sharing control. Team members share control by listening and responding thoughtfully. Leaders share control by ensuring everyone has a voice and by being genuinely sensitive.
Like Julia Rosowski found at Google, even when that embarrassing ouch email went out.
Right. Even with a mistake like that, the underlying safety meant they could talk about it openly, honestly, and fix it without blame. It creates that feeling that everyone's got your back, which is incredibly liberating for a team.
Psychological safety lets teams flourish, innovate, learn, but individual success also really hinges on focus, right? Especially now.
Absolutely critical.
So next, let's look at how our brains can get stuck, how distraction can literally lead to disaster, and maybe how we build these mental models to stay sharp and adaptable.
Yeah, this is a crucial area, especially in our hyper-connected world. And let's start with a chilling, real-world example of focus lost under pressure. Air France Flight 447, May 2009.
Oh, I remember this. Tragic.
Absolutely tragic. Airbus A330, Rio to Paris, 228 people. Junior pilots were flying while the captain rested. Plane on autopilot, cruising at 32,000 feet. Seemed routine.
Until it wasn't. What went wrong?
They flew into a severe thunderstorm, and the pitot tubes, the external sensors measuring airspeed, iced over.
Okay, so they lost airspeed indication.
Correct. Immediately, alarms blare, including a loud stall. Stall warning, meaning the nose is too high, plane's losing lift. And the airspeed indicators on the screens go blank.
A pilot's nightmare. What did they do?
This is the critical, fatal part. Pilot Bonin, instead of lowering the nose to gain speed, which is standard stall recovery at high altitude, almost reflexive, he kept pulling back on the stick, pushing the plane further into the stall. The co-pilot, Robert, also failed to interpret the data correctly. He got fixated on the missing airspeed, not the critical pitch attitude.
So they had alarms, they had some information, but they reacted completely wrong. They flew the plane right into the ocean. Was it a technical failure or something human?
It was profoundly human, largely due to something called cognitive tunneling.
Cognitive tunneling. What's that?
It's when your attention narrows intensely. You latch on to the easiest or most obvious thing, often ignoring the bigger picture or common sense. Especially happens after a period of relaxed attention, like being on autopilot.
So they were just staring at the screens but not seeing?
Exactly. They were looking, but didn't know where to look, or what the data really meant in context. Even when the sensors cleared and the computer started giving correct instructions, like literally saying, pull up, they were so lost in that tunnel vision, they couldn't process it, trapped in a mental loop of wrong assumptions.
And this tunneling, it gets worse with automation, doesn't it? When we rely on systems, our own mental muscles kind of atrophy.
That's the paradox, precisely. Automation makes life easier, reduces workload, but it can lead to vigilance decrement. Our attention fades because we're just passively watching, not actively engaged.
We become potted plants, just watching the lights blink.
Exactly. So when something does go wrong and the automation fails or gives weird info, we might react on autopilot, even if it's the wrong reaction, because our active problem-solving skills are rusty from disuse.
That makes so much sense. So how do we fight that? How do we counter cognitive tunneling or becoming too reliant on automation? How do we keep our focus sharp, adaptable?
The key is cultivating robust mental models.
Mental models. Tell me more about those.
Okay, think of Nurse Darlene, an incredibly talented, experienced nurse interviewed by researcher Beth Crandall. Darlene was monitoring an infant in an incubator. She noticed these really subtle signs. The baby's skin was slightly mottled, belly a bit distended, tiny bit of blood from a Band-Aid. All the machines showed normal vitals. Another nurse looked and saw nothing wrong.
But Darlene felt something was off.
She knew something was gravely wrong based on those tiny cues. The baby, it turned out, had a life-threatening intestinal blockage.
Wow. How did she see what the other nurse, even the machines, missed? Was it just an experienced hunch?
It was way more than a hunch. Darlene's hunch was actually a highly refined, deeply ingrained picture in her mind, a mental model of what a healthy baby looks like. Not just vitals, but skin tone, behavior, subtle cues.
So she had this baseline image.
Exactly. When the real baby didn't match that internal ideal image, her attention snagged on the discrepancies. The other nurse, lacking that strong, pre-existing mental model, just saw the individual data points as normal, didn't see the pattern.
Okay, so mental models are like habitual forecasting. The stories we tell ourselves about how things should work.
That's a great way to put it. Psychologists call it habitual forecasting. The more robust, specific, detailed your mental models, the more you envision future conversations, actions, outcomes, the better your focus. You anticipate better, and you instinctively know what's important noise versus just noise.
So you're constantly forecasting, even subconsciously, what should be happening. And when reality deviates, bang, you notice it.
Right.
Did that MIT study on productive workers find something similar?
It absolutely did. Researchers at MIT studied this successful recruiting firm, analyzed profits, calendars, over 125,000 emails. Huge data set.
Okay.
They found the most productive workers, the superstars, consistently worked on only about 5 projects at once. Not a crazy workload, but very careful investment of energy.
Focused.
Very focused. And crucially, these superstars shared this peculiar intellectual tick. They love to generate theories about everything.
Theories, like scientific theories.
More like explanations. They were obsessed with explaining why things happened. Why did this account succeed? Why did that one fail? Why is this client happy? Why does this management style work? They were constantly trying to make sense of their world.
So they were effectively building, refining, testing mental models all the time, even if they didn't call it that.
Precisely. Constantly telling stories about what they observed, throwing ideas out to colleagues. Hey, imagine the client says this. What would we do? Envisioning pitches, sharing anecdotes, dreaming up expansion plans.
And this constant model building paid off.
Big time. This active mental model building, this productive thinking and forecasting, earned them an average of $10,000 more in bonuses per year. They outperformed not by doing more tasks, but by thinking more productively and applying those insights.
That's a powerful parallel. It's the opposite of Air France 447, right? Instead of getting stuck in a rigid loop, they're constantly engaged, adapting your understanding. Is there another example of how these proactive models can avert disaster?
A perfect and incredibly dramatic one, Qantas Flight 32.
The A380 incident.
That's the one, 2010. An Airbus A380, even bigger than the AF447 plane, had a catastrophic engine explosion mid-flight over Singapore. Utter chaos. 21 of 22 major systems damaged, alarm screaming, fuel leaking rapidly.
Terrifying. How did they survive?
Captain Richard Champion de Crespigny. He had a crucial advantage. He had already drilled his crew on building and adapting mental models before the flight, specifically preparing for complex failures.
So they'd practiced thinking about what normal looked like and what severe deviations might look like, too.
Yes. So when the crisis hit, cockpit filled with alarms and lights, de Crespigny immediately recognized the danger of cognitive tunneling. And crucially, when a computerized checklist designed for less severe failures told them to transfer fuel to the leaking wing.
Which would have been disastrous.
Catastrophic, he shouted, "Stop!" He instinctively remembered a past disaster involving fuel transfer. Based on his deep mental model of the aircraft, his prior knowledge, he ignored the automated instruction.
Wow, he overrode the machine based on his mental model.
Exactly. Through that active engagement, critical thinking, and a pre-existing flexible mental model, they landed that crippled giant safely, avoided the fate of AF447.
Incredible. So having a robust, adaptable mental model saved hundreds of lives. But what happens when those models become rigid? When we get too attached to our stories about how the world works?
That's where things get dangerous. Look at the tragic story of the Yom Kippur War in 1973.
Okay.
Eli Zira, head of Israeli military intelligence, tragically ignored overwhelming evidence of an imminent Egyptian and Syrian attack. Report after report of troop movements, unusual exercises, equipment buildups.
All the warning signs were there.
Absolutely. But Zira systematically dismissed them as noise, distractions. Why? Because his fixed mental model was absolute. Egypt and Syria couldn't win a war against Israel, therefore they wouldn't dare attack.
That sounds like a really dangerous form of cognitive tunneling. Being so fixed on one theory, you filter out everything else.
It was exactly that. Zira, unfortunately, lacked the patience for long and open discussions. He actively discouraged dissent, even humiliated officers who predicted war. Famously said, once an estimate was formulated, everyone was committed to it.
She shut down debate.
Completely. This solidified his rigid mental model, blinding him and the whole intelligence apparatus to obvious, undeniable signs. The outcome was catastrophic. Israel caught totally unprepared, significant early losses, a brutal war. The inquiry later concluded his obsession with firm, unchanging decisions blinded him.
So to stay focused, to be truly productive, it's not just having a mental model. It needs to be adaptable, constantly questioned, open to new data, even dissenting views. How can we, apply this?
Precisely. The practical application for all of us is to constantly envision what might happen. Tell yourself a detailed story about expected outcomes for a project. Anticipate potential obstacles. Think about how you'd handle them. This habitual forecasting, building these pictures in your mind, makes it infinitely easier to direct your focus effectively when things inevitably go off script.
It prepares you.
It prepares you. In a world drowning in distractions, the key is training your brain to continually forecast, question its own assumptions, stay adaptable, be an active participant in interpreting your world, not just a passive observer.
Forecasting helps us focus, helps us adapt. But what about when we're setting our sights on a future goal, an achievement? Let's talk about goals. Because there seems to be this interesting dance between two very different types of goals.
Yes, this brings us to the fascinating interplay between, well, SMART goals and something quite different, stretch goals.
SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. Most people have heard of those, right? GE under Jack Welch really pushed them.
They did. Hugely influential, and the concept comes from psychology research back in the 70s, Locke and Latham.
And they work, right? They help break down big ambitions.
They absolutely do, for certain things. That classic 1975 typist experiment showed it perfectly. Typists averaging 95 line shower, given a SMART goal of 108, actually hit 112. They're excellent for bridging that gap between just vaguely hoping something happens and actually figuring out how to do it. Concrete steps, clear milestones.
Makes sense. But if they're so effective, what are the limits? When does being achievable or realistic actually become, well, a problem?
The problem creeps in when SMART goals become the only game in town. At GE, despite rigorous SMART goal setting, some big divisions like nuclear equipment, jet engines, they kind of stagnated. They struggled with big innovations.
What?
Because the very nature of SMART goals, achievable, realistic, can sometimes limit thinking to just incremental improvements, little tweaks. It can prevent radical innovation, fundamental change. It can foster this cognitive closure where you get fixated on the easy, short-term wins and stop looking for the truly disruptive stuff.
Okay, so you need something else to push beyond just tweaking things. That's where stretch goals come in. Something audacious, maybe even seemingly impossible at first.
Exactly. Welch understood this. He introduced workouts at GE. These were dynamic meetings specifically designed to encourage bigger ambitions, much longer-term, audacious plans.
How are they different?
The rules were deliberately simple, almost anti-SMART. Employees could suggest any goal. No complex charts needed initially. Managers had to approve or deny quickly on the spot. The idea was make it easy to say yes, encourage bigger thinking. Details came later.
Give me an example.
Okay, a worker at an engine factory was frustrated by the cost of these protective shields. He suggested making them in-house for half the cost, had a scribbled blueprint on a napkin.
Not exactly a polished proposal.
Not at all. The manager paused, looked at it, and just said, I guess we'll try it out. That totally unsmart, messy idea saved the division $200,000 that year.
Wow. Just by being open to the audacious idea. And the famous bullet train story Welch told, that fits this too, right? Radical ambition.
Perfectly. Welch often told the story of the Japanese engineer tasked with inventing a train 10 times faster than anything existing, deemed impossible by almost everyone.
A true stretch goal.
The ultimate stretch goal. It forced a complete rethinking of everything about railway engineering tracks, aerodynamics, propulsion. Shattered complacency led to entirely new thinking, and ultimately, the Shinkansen bullet train.
And this stretch goal philosophy had a huge impact at GE Aviation.
Profound. Welch set an incredibly audacious stretch goal. Cut manufacturing errors by 70%. 70%.
That sounds impossible.
It sounded impossible, and that's why it worked. It triggered systemic change across the entire division. Forced overhauls in training, hiring. They started looking for team skills, flexible mindsets, redefined jobs, restructured the organization.
And a result?
Staggering. Defects fell by 75%. Costs dropped 10% annually. No SMART goal alone would ever have triggered that kind of radical transformation.
So research backs this up. Stretch goals spark bigger leaps.
Consistently. Studies call them jolting events. They disrupt complacency and promote new ways of thinking. Spark outsized jumps in innovation, productivity. They shift attention to new futures, spark exploratory learning, experimentation, playfulness.
So for us, for listeners, it's not really an either. It's about combining the two. Smart and stretch.
That's the key insight. And Charles Duhigg himself learned this the hard way while writing the actual book we're discussing.
No way. How?
He initially struggled massively, got overwhelmed by the huge goal, read a whole book, found himself doing easier stuff, tweaking outlines, answering emails instead of writing chapters. Felt like a total failure, just bogged down.
The irony. Researching productivity while feeling unproductive.
Exactly. Until his editor gave him that obvious advice. Charles, you've researched this for 2 years. Why don't you try applying the book's principles to your own life?
Use your own research.
Right. And Duhigg realized he needed both. He needed that overarching, audacious stretch goal, finish the book, right at the top of his to-do list. And he needed the detailed, actionable, smart sub-goals underneath it. Write 500 words today, outline chapter 3 by Friday.
The big dream and the small steps.
That dual approach finally helped him overcome that cognitive closure, that tendency to get stuck on easy stuff. It let him break free and actually finish the book.
Okay, so setting the right kinds of goals, that combination, is vital for individuals. But how does this apply when we're leading teams or part of bigger organizations, especially facing really complex, messy, real-world problems?
Right. This brings us squarely into managing others and the power of lean, agile thinking and fundamentally trust. Let's look at a really complex, high-stakes situation, the Frank Jansen kidnapping.
The prosecutor's father. I remember that case.
Exactly. He was kidnapped from his home. And the early leads for the FBI were just incredibly confusing, ambiguous. Strange texts from the kidnappers with weird demands, where my things are, references to Jeffe and Frano, requests for cigarettes for a specific prison inmate.
Just a mess of random details.
A total mess. Investigators were desperately trying to make sense of it, prioritize. Dozens of leads, life on the line. Chasing some year-old cryptic chat about things seemed like a really low priority.
Yeah, how do you manage that? It sounds like classic information overload in a crisis.
Yeah.
And the FBI historically wasn't exactly known for being nimble, right?
Historically, no. Their previous approach to big projects, especially tech, was often this rigid waterfall approach. Outline thousands of specs, get endless approvals.
Bureaucracy.
Lots of it, often resulting in dysfunctional, over-budget, or just canceled projects, like their early, disastrous attempts at the Sentinel case management system.
So that top-down rigid structure wasn't cutting it. This makes me think of Toyota again. The Toyota production system, famously empowering the frontline workers. Was that the kind of shift the FBI needed?
It's a perfect parallel and incredibly impactful. Toyota's system, lean manufacturing, especially seen at the NUM-MI joint venture with GM in the 80s, it fundamentally changed things.
That was the plant in California, taking over a problematic GM factory.
That's the one, Fremont, California. Notoriously bad plant under GM. Richard Madrid, a former GM worker who went to NUMI, described GM workers as just cogs in a machine. Opinions ignored, expertise wasted.
Standard old-school manufacturing. So what was different at Toyota?
Madrid went to Japan for Toyota training. He saw a worker make a simple, common mistake, misthreading a bolt on the assembly line.
Okay. What would happen at GM?
At GM, it would get marked. Fixed later, down the line. Costly repair, shoddier car, wasted time.
Right, but at Toyota?
At Toyota, the worker immediately pulled the andon cord. This physical rope running above the line, it literally stopped the entire production line.
Stopped the whole line for one bolt?
Yes, and managers, engineers instantly rushed over to help solve the problem right there, on the spot at the source.
Wow, that sends a message.
A huge message. Quality is paramount. Errors get fixed immediately. And crucially, the worker closest to the problem is empowered to identify it and initiate the fix without fear. Toyota's whole system relies on pushing decision-making down, trusting the expertise of people doing the work. Madrid saw another worker suggest a new tool, got a working prototype in 15 minutes because his input was valued.
That's a radical cultural shift.
Yes.
From don't stop the line, don't bother us, to stop everything, let's fix it now. Did the FBI manage a similar shift away from its bureaucracy?
They absolutely did. A major agile transformation. Facing those dire tech problems, like Sentinel, they looked to agile software methods. Assistant Director John Fulgham's team, tasked with rescuing Sentinel, adopted agile principles, generated thousands of user scenarios, held daily stand-ups quick, 15-minute meetings, standing up to keep it brief.
Okay.
And crucially, they empowered whoever was closest to a problem, a programmer, a junior field agent, as the expert on that specific issue. gave them autonomy to make suggestions, like modeling Sentinel on TurboTax for ease of use.
So they decentralized authority, like Toyota. Trusted the front line.
Exactly. High-ranking officials were explicitly told, no micromanaging. Offer suggestions, sure, but the closest expert evaluates them, decides whether to use them or not.
And the results. Did Sentinel finally work?
Astounding results. Sentinel, which had failed for years, went live in just 16 months. Used by 30,000 agents, credited now with helping solve thousands of crimes.
An incredible turnaround.
And beyond the software, Director Mueller pushed a broader paradigm shift in the FBI culture. Junior agents were actively encouraged to make independent decisions, to pull the anon cord on investigations if they saw something crucial, instead of waiting for layers of approval, trusting the people closest to the action.
So this all really boils down to building a culture of commitment and trust. That autonomy must be incredibly motivating for people.
It absolutely is. The core lesson from NMMI, from the FBI shift, is that people work smarter, are more engaged, perform better when they have genuine decision-making authority, and when they believe their colleagues and leaders are truly committed to their success.
That sense of control again?
That sense of control fuels motivation, exactly. But it needs an environment where suggestions are heard, where mistakes, the inevitable result of trying new things, aren't punished.
Yeah, that fear of mistakes kills innovation.
Totally. There was a big study looking at thousands of startup cultures. Researchers identified different types, star cultures, engineering cultures, but the ones that consistently outperformed all others were what they called commitment firms.
Commitment firms. What defined them?
They prioritized employee happiness, invested heavily in training, generous benefits like maternity leave, childcare, work-from-home options. They prioritized people over quick profits.
And that worked better.
Way better. None of them failed. Fastest to go public, highest profitability, leaner operations. Employees excelled at self-direction, less internal rivalry, better customer understanding. They built fierce loyalty, unleashed talent.
So letting go of that tight top-down control, allowing for mistakes, trusting the front line, it seems the risks are worth the reward.
The risks are real, sure. Decentralizing authority can lead to mistakes, a misguided hunch, an unnecessary and Judean pull. But the consistent, measurable rewards of autonomy in these commitment cultures vastly outweigh the costs. The biggest mistake an organization can make is never letting its people make mistakes, because that fear just stifles everything.
And Frank Jansen, the kidnapping victim, his rescue was tied to this shift.
It was seen as a powerful testament to this changed mindset. Individual agents were empowered to follow instincts, pursue those weird, seemingly long-shot leads, make critical decisions on the fly, ultimately leading to his safe recovery.
Okay, so trust and autonomy unlock huge potential in teams and organizations. But how do we, as individuals, navigate uncertainty? Make the best choices when the stakes are high, the future's unclear? That feels like a core challenge for everyone.
It really does. And this brings us to decision-making and the fascinating process of embracing uncertainty using what's sometimes called Bayesian psychology.
Bayesian sounds mathematical.
It has mathematical roots, but the concept is intuitive. Let's look at the high-pressure world of pro poker. Annie Duke, world-class player.
Okay.
Critical moment, tournament of champions. She has a strong hand pair of tens, but her opponent, the legendary hyper-rational fossil man, goes all in, pushes everything into the pot.
Oh man, high stakes. Logic versus intuition time.
Totally. Standard poker odds, based on her knowledge, Fossil Man's tendencies, they all screamed call. But Fossil Man almost never bluffed like that. Her intuition, that deep gut feeling, was screaming fold. Intense mental conflict.
What did she do?
She folded. Gut-wrenching. Then another player tells her later she misread it, she would have won. Terrible mistake, right? She's filled with regret.
Agonizing.
But then Fossil Man reveals his hand. He actually had kings, a way better hand. Her fold was absolutely the right decision.
Wow, so her gut was right, even when the surface odds look different.
Exactly. It highlights the terrifying, imprecise nature of forecasting. Making good decisions forces us to confront what we don't know, to choose with imperfect information. It relies on the scary science of predicting uncertain futures.
So how do you get better at that imprecise science?
Yeah.
Especially when signals conflict like that.
Well, the Good Judgment Project, GJP, tried to figure that out. Massive university project funded by U.S. intelligence.
What do they do?
They train regular people, lawyers, housewives, students to become better forecasters of complex foreign affairs events.
How? What was the training?
The key was teaching probabilistic thinking.
Thinking in probabilities. Like, what are the chances?
Exactly. Holding multiple, often conflicting outcomes in your head at the same time and estimating their relative likelihoods. Which can be unsettling, right? It forces you to actively contemplate futures you don't want.
Yeah, easier to just hope for the best.
Much easier. But this probabilistic training alone led to a staggering 50% increase in prediction accuracy. The teams that did best were those engaging in daily online discussions, constantly adjusting their probabilities based on new info, diverse views.
So constantly updating your mental odds.
Right. The GJP found that having grand theories wasn't that useful. Being able to look at a narrow question from many angles and quickly readjust probabilities, tremendously useful.
That's a huge boost in accuracy just from training how to think. Does this connect to our natural abilities? Or is it something we have to painstakingly learn?
It absolutely connects to our natural abilities. Humans, it turns out, are astoundingly good Bayesian predictors, even subconsciously.
So we kind of do this naturally.
We do. Think of Bayesian probability, named after Reverend Bayes way back when, made practical by computers later, as how our brains constantly update initial beliefs or priors with new info to get better conclusions. It's that intuitive, okay, based on what I thought and this new data, how likely is X now? Then you test it, update again.
Like learning through experience.
Exactly. Psychologists Tenenbaum and Griffiths did this amazing experiment, asked students to predict things, movie box office, lifespans, cake baking time, how long a congressman stays in office based on just one tiny piece of data. No stats training.
And how do they do?
Startlingly accurate, often within 10% of real-world data. Students intuitively grasped different statistical distributions, power law for movies, normal curve for lifespans, something called Erlang for politicians.
Without even knowing the names.
Without knowing the names. Tenenbaum used the analogy of a 2-year-old learning horse or hairbrush from just a few examples. A kid grasps complex boundaries from tiny amounts of data, processing tons of sensory input. A computer needs explicit instructions for everything. Our brains are naturally wired for this kind of prediction from limited data.
Okay, so we have this amazing natural Bayesian instinct, this capacity to predict, but we still make terrible decisions sometimes. Where do we typically go wrong?
The pitfall very often lies in biased assumptions, particularly our very human tendency to notice and remember successes while overlooking or forgetting failures.
Confirmation bias? Kind of.
Very related. We read about the billion-dollar startups, right, but we ignore the hundreds that went bankrupt. We go to crowded restaurants, but overlook the empty ones that failed. Our minds get unconsciously trained to expect success. We build a skewed base rate, a biased prior distribution based on an incomplete sample of reality.
So, to make better decisions, we need to actively fight that bias. We need to seek out information on failures, not just successes. That sounds hard. Emotionally hard.
It is hard emotionally, but it's absolutely crucial. Truly successful people do this actively. They read about companies that went bankrupt. They have lunch with colleagues who got passed over for promotion. They scrutinize their own missteps. They actively ask for criticism.
It takes guts to ask your friend why they got fired, or a divorcee what really went wrong.
It does. But calibrating your base rate, your fundamental understanding of reality, requires learning from both the accomplished and the humbled. The application for us. Force yourself to envision multiple futures, even contradictory ones. That equips you for wiser choices. Hone your Bayesian instincts. Seek out diverse experiences, perspectives, ideas. Let info sit to clarify options. And crucially, embrace uncertainty.
Except that you can't know everything for sure.
Exactly. Fortune telling isn't real. Trying to predict with 100% certainty is a trap. The real mistake is avoiding predictions altogether because you crave certainty. As Annie Duke's brother told her about poker and life, as long as you're okay with uncertainty, you can make the odds work for you.
That's a powerful way to frame it. Okay, making wise decisions is crucial, but where do the new ideas even come from? The breakthroughs, the innovations? What's the secret sauce for that?
Innovation. It's this fascinating mix of discipline and disorder, and it rarely happens in a neat, tidy way. Let's start with an example most people know. Disney's Frozen.
Huge hit. Looked effortless.
But early screenings of the film back when it was called The Snow Queen were apparently a disaster. Audience silent, unmoved. The story was just problematic. Anna was bossy, Elsa was genuinely evil and revenge-driven, leading an army of scary snow monsters. It lacked any emotional connection.
Wow. That is a long way from the Frozen we know. The sisterly love story. How did they possibly turn that around?
They tapped into a powerful principle underlying a lot of innovation, juxtaposing old ideas in fundamentally new ways.
Remixing.
Exactly. Think of Jerome Robbins creating West Side Story. His audacious idea combined classical ballet, opera, experimental theater, jazz, modernist drama, all to create a modern Romeo and Juliet set among rival NYC street gangs.
Totally different worlds smashed together.
Completely. The genius wasn't inventing entirely new art forms. It was stacking familiar old blocks like a Shakespearean first meeting in completely new ways, like setting it against a wild mambo dance. Innovation, so often, isn't creation from nothing. It's creatively combining existing knowledge, seeing connections others miss.
So it really is about remixing existing elements in novel ways.
Did research back this up? This combination idea is the engine of creativity.
Very much so. Sociologists Uzi and Jones did this massive study, analyzed almost 18 million scientific papers. They measured originality by looking at cited sources. Were they conventional pairings, like Newton and Einstein, or unusual ones, like Einstein and some obscure ancient Chinese philosopher?
Okay. What did they find?
Strikingly, over 90% of the content in the papers they identified as truly creative was already published knowledge, old stuff. But conventional concepts were applied to questions in unconsidered ways, often mixed with an intrusion of unusual combinations of ideas. It's the combination that sparks creativity.
Like Edison borrowing from telegraphy for the light bulb?
Perfect example. Edison importing ideas from telegraphy into lighting, the telephone. Or the design firm IDEO, creating a best-selling water bottle by mixing elements from a water carafe and a shampoo nozzle.
This sounds exactly like the role of idea brokers, people who connect different fields. Precisely. Idea brokers are people, or even organizations, who transfer knowledge between different industries or groups. They see how similar problems are tackled in different settings and bring those solutions across. Sociologist Ronald Burt studied managers at a big electronics company. The most creative ideas consistently came from managers who were good at taking concepts from one division and explaining or applying them to another. They usually had more diverse social networks, bridging different knowledge domains.
And Disney used this internally too, right? Tapping into their own team's personal experiences to fix Frozen.
They absolutely did. Their internal story trust, the creative leadership, had gotten too close to the flawed early version. They needed distance, fresh eyes. The breakthrough really came when Jennifer Lee was promoted from writer to co-director, forced her to see it differently.
A change in perspective.
Exactly. And the songwriters, Kristen Anderson Lopez and Bobby Lopez, pushed her by asking this deeply personal question. What would it feel like if you were Elsa? They encouraged everyone to explore their own emotions, feeling judged, having a hidden curse or power making them different.
Connecting to personal experience.
Yeah. Steve Jobs famously said, creativity is just connecting things. He thought creative people just saw something because they'd had more experiences or they've thought more about their experiences than other people. The takeaway: broker your own experiences, reflect on them, never overlook emotions as incredibly powerful creative fuel.
So personal emotions, powerful fuel. But creativity isn't always smooth sailing, right? There's often tension, conflict, maybe even panic. Is that tension necessary?
Often, yes. That tension is frequently critical. Innovation often pops up precisely when different perspectives clash, heightened by deadlines, debates, pressure. This creative desperation can be essential.
Creative desperation, I like that.
There's a great analogy from biology. Joseph Connell's intermediate disturbance hypothesis. He studied biodiversity in rainforests, coral reefs. He found the richest pockets of biodiversity where intermediate disturbances had occurred, like a fallen tree opening a gap in the canopy, or a moderate fire, or a storm clearing part of a reef.
So not too little disturbance, not too much, but just the right, a Goldilocks disturbance.
Exactly. Too small, no change, dominant species wins. Too big, wipes everything out. But just the right amount allows new species to compete, adapt, flourish, creates a richer ecosystem.
And applied to creativity.
Applied to creativity, the panic, the stress, the clashes, they aren't necessarily signs of failure. Often they're the very conditions that foster flexibility, force adaptation, spark new ideas, push us to see old things in new ways. It's the uncomfortable friction that makes new connections possible.
That makes sense. So how do we use that idea to stay critical of our own work? Avoid falling in love with the first good idea.
Yeah, that relief after a breakthrough can blind you. You need to actively force self-criticism, look at it from different angles. Sometimes change the power dynamics, like Jennifer Lee's promotion, forcing a new view on Frozen. It's about embracing destruction and upheaval, but only if the disturbance is the right size.
Right-sized disturbances.
Ultimately, creativity isn't some magic talent, it's a process. You can break it down, learn it. Anyone can become an innovation broker by being sensitive to experiences, embracing that creative desperation, and maintaining critical distance through those right-sized disturbances that force fresh perspectives.
Okay, so innovation requires processing information differently, combining ideas.
Right.
But what about when we're just drowning in data?
Yeah.
Our final segment. How do we turn that flood of information into actual usable knowledge?
The information blindness problem. So relevant today. We are surrounded by just unprecedented amounts of data, right? Smartphones track steps, websites track spending, apps manage schedules, investments.
Data everywhere.
Everywhere. In theory, this should make answers obvious, decisions easy. But in practice, too much data often makes it harder to decide. It leads to information blindness. The mind just stops absorbing when it feels overwhelmed.
Like that crazy 401k study you mentioned earlier, where offering more retirement plan choices actually led to fewer people signing up.
Exactly that study. Perfect example. Offer just 2 plans, 75% enrollment. Okay. Up to 25 plans. Still pretty good, 72%.
Yeah.
But then, 39 plans, enrollment drops to 65%. 60 plans plummets to 53%.
More choice, less action, even for free money.
Even for free money. Faced with too much information, our brains default to this binary trap. Either try to make sense of it all, which is quickly overwhelming, or ignore it completely. And way too often, we just choose to ignore it.
So how do we fight that? How do we overcome information blindness and actually turn all that data into something useful, something that sticks?
One really powerful answer comes from this radical experiment in the Cincinnati Public Schools. South Avondale Elementary failing system. They had online dashboards, detailed memos, endless data available to teachers, but over 90% of teachers admitted they hardly ever looked at it. Data blindness. And student outcomes were poor. 63% of third graders failed state benchmarks in 2008. Grim.
Okay, so what did the district do? Throw money at it.
That's what's radical. They launched the Elementary Initiative, EI, targeted these low-performing schools, but gave them no additional funds. Zero.
No extra money. Just change the process. How?
Their entire focus was how teachers made decisions with the data they already had. And here's the key. Teachers were ordered to put aside the digital tools.
Get rid of the dashboards.
For certain tasks, yes. They had to physically manipulate information by hand. Transcribe student test scores onto index cards, draw graphs on huge sheets of butcher paper hung on the walls, run little experiments in the classroom, scribble results on whiteboards in these data rooms.
Making it harder work, basically.
Yeah.
More manual labor.
Exactly. It created disfluency. It made the data harder to process at first, but stickier once it was really understood. By physically engaging with it, struggling with it, teachers transformed abstract numbers into real insights, actionable plans for individual kids, and South Avondale's test scores improved dramatically.
Wow. So the struggle made it meaningful.
That's the profound lesson. There's a difference between finding an answer on a screen and truly understanding what it means.
That's a huge distinction. It's about making the data work for you, wrestling with it, not just passively consuming it.
It's active, deliberate engagement. Look at Charlotte Flood's super successful debt collection team at Chase. Most debt collectors, despite memos and computer screens full of data, rarely used it effectively. Just talking on the phone was overwhelming enough.
Yeah, tough job.
Really tough. Yet Flood's team consistently collected $1 million more per month than other teams and had high employee satisfaction, too.
Okay, what was her secret? How did she get them to use the info?
Her team developed hypotheses. Simple, testable theories like, women are more likely to pay if called at home in the morning, or people watching soap operas respond better to empathy.
Little theories about customer behavior.
Exactly. And then they actively tested them. They kept this detailed calendar, basically printouts of their call list with tons of handwritten notes and comments on each interaction.
So they were actively looking for patterns.
Yes. By hypothesizing and testing, their sensitivity to the information flowing past was dramatically heightened. They started noticing subtle details. Others missed the sound of a soap opera, a religious reference, because they were actively looking for clues to prove or disprove their theories.
The information wasn't just washing over them.
Right. It was absorbed almost without noticing because they were so engrossed with it, treating each call like a mini experiment. This method gave them mental folders, frameworks for understanding that torrent of data that had previously just been noise.
That's a great example of engaging with real-time data. Does this apply to personal life decisions, too? Like wrestling with our own internal data?
Absolutely. Think of Delia Morris, gifted high school student facing huge challenges, homelessness. Family pressured her to babysit her nephew, which meant giving up her shot at college, her path out of poverty.
Heartbreaking choice. Family versus future.
Exactly. Her father saw the obvious choice. Help family now. But her wise teacher, Mr. Edwards, taught his students the engineering design process.
Well, engineering design.
For life problems.
Yeah. Define dilemmas, collect data, brainstorm solutions, debate alternatives, conduct iterative experiments, break overwhelming problems into manageable pieces.
So she applied this structured process to her personal dilemma. That must have been hard.
Incredibly hard, but also incredibly liberating. The deliberate process introduced disfluency. It disrupted her initial binary frame. Help family now, OR, let them down.
Forced her to see other options. Right. She collected data, including a crucial, painful story from her sister, whose after-school job led to college delays and a dead end. This forced Delia to reframe the decision. Not immediate help versus letting them down, but helping now versus helping in more important, lasting ways by going to college, building a stable future.
And her father understood.
He did. Seeing the logic, the deeper commitment, he agreed. This kind of process forces us to objectify our own lives, our past decisions, countering the biases and emotions that cloud our judgment.
And this whole idea of disfluency, making things harder initially, it even applies to something simple like taking notes.
It does. Perfect microcosm. That 2014 study comparing note-taking, longhand versus laptop.
Right, laptop users take more notes faster.
They do, more verbatim notes. But the study found the handwriters consistently learned and retained more. Why? Because longhand is more disfluent. It requires more effort, forces active cognitive processing, synthesizing, summarizing, rather than just passive transcription.
So paradoxically, making information harder to absorb at first by forcing us to manipulate it makes it easier to understand and keep in the long run.
That's the powerful, overarching insight here. Productive learners, teachers, debt collectors, students, us instinctively transform what life throws at them. They know the best lessons, the deepest understanding, force us to do something with information, manipulate it, wrestle with it, turn it into an experiment. That disfluency, that intentional friction, paradoxically makes information easier to truly grasp and use. It's how we turn raw data into real knowledge.
Wow, okay. We have journeyed through so much. Motivation through control, team intelligence via psychological safety, focus through mental models. Then balancing smart and stretch goals, managing others through trust, making decisions by embracing uncertainty, and now absorbing data through disfluency.
That's a lot. It's a lot, but it connects beautifully.
It feels incredibly cohesive. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. If we zoom out now, what does this all mean? The author, Charles Duhigg, he pulls it all together, right? What's the big underlying idea?
He does. And the core underpinning, the connective tissue through all these insights we've talked about, is that productivity, real effectiveness, boils down to recognizing choices that other people often overlook.
Choices others miss.
Exactly. It's about making specific decisions in specific ways that might seem counterintuitive. We see it everywhere. How we choose to see our own lives and purpose, the stories we tell ourselves, the kinds of goals we set, the culture we build in teams, how we frame choices under uncertainty, and how we actively manage information instead of letting it wash over us.
So productive people and companies, they force themselves to make choices, to engage differently, in ways most others just don't.
They push themselves to think differently. Productivity emerges not just from working harder, but from making different kinds of choices, often the harder, more deliberate ones.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, that Duhigg himself apparently struggled with this while writing the book. He researched productivity for years, felt like an expert, then got totally bogged down.
It's the ultimate irony.
Stuck on outlines, emails, feeling like a failure.
It's a testament to how hard these principles are to apply, even when you know them intellectually. His editor had to point out the obvious. Apply the book's own discoveries to your own life.
Use your research, man.
Right. And Duhigg realized productivity isn't about every single action being hyper-efficient or avoiding all waste. Sometimes, he found, you have to foster tension to encourage creativity. Sometimes what looks like a misstep is the most important footfall along the path to success.
Like that research he did that didn't even make the final book.
Exactly. Researching a story about a man named McLean, didn't use it in the end, seemed like wasted time. But that wasted time was invaluable because it helped him clarify his focus, understand the core mechanics of what the book needed to be, and allowed him to finally move forward.
That's the real wisdom, isn't it? It's about the journey, the learning, even from the detours, the things that feel like failure. It's not about perfection, but deliberate engagement.
Absolutely. That's the final wisdom here. Anyone can become smarter, faster, better over time. It's not innate talent. It's about consistently learning to recognize and make these certain choices that to many might not be obvious. We've seen how schools can transform, how teams learn better from mistakes, how even senior citizens find new purpose. It's about empowering people closest to the problem, trusting their insights, embracing that productive discomfort, the kind that forces us to think, question, and ultimately grow.
So we've covered an incredible amount today. Finding motivation through choosing control, building team intelligence with psychological safety, sharpening focus with mental models,
Balancing smart and stretch goals, managing through trust, deciding with Bayesian thinking.
and learning through that productive struggle, that disfluency, it's all interconnected.
Deeply interconnected. And these aren't just abstract ideas for, academics or CEOs. They are actionable insights for you listening right now to apply in your own life. Personal, professional, community.
You have a power to make these choices.
You absolutely do. To deliberately engage with your world, your own mind, and transform how you approach challenges.
So as you reflect on today's deep dive, what stands out to you? Maybe it's that quiet power of choosing control, even in small things, or the surprising strength found in psychological safety, or maybe the subtle art of learning from both success and failure to really calibrate your understanding. The ultimate takeaway isn't just working harder or even just smarter in the old sense. It's about engaging with your world and your own mind in a more deliberate, more intentional way. What small, overlooked choice will you make differently this week to become just a little bit smarter, a little bit faster, a little bit better?
Thanks for tuning in to the Book Summary Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, hit that like button, subscribe for more summaries, and share it with someone who's ready to grow. Want deeper insights, exclusive book notes, and reading tips? Join our free newsletter. The link's in the description. And don't forget, if you'd like to read the full book, our affiliate link is right below. It helps support the channel and keeps the summaries coming. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing.